Hey, welcome back to Sit Social Issues Time. I'm here with my wonderful co-hosts, Tilde and Gothamy. I'm Francois. And ladies, so it's episode 4 of our new season.
4. Yeah.
So thank you for the language instruction. So this episode,
Chad.
hit the count.
Nalugu.
I knew she didn't even know the numbers. I didn't know the language.
I had to make sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. There we go. See, I did it. Not okra. Are you hungry?
That would be good. Okra and some yams. Okay, that's it, so. Okay, so you can tell that we're really hungry. But our topic today is in light of the fact that we've got a female nominee for the Democratic Party.
And I'd like to add a disclaimer right there.
Right.
That we are taking no sides here.
No, none. But we're going to have fun with this topic.
We're neither criticizing any politician or taking any sides.
We're just laying out the information.
That's right.
So thank you for setting that straight. Yes.
You bet. Absolutely.
We don't want any negative emails.
That's right.
And so, ladies, let's talk a little bit about the countries that have had female leaders long before the U.S. Because for us, this is, and really she hasn't been the first to run in the U.S. She's been the first that's been nominated for the party. Right. And so, because you've had, some women in the 70s, Shirley Chisholm, who had ran for president. And so, why is it that this is such a phenomenon here? And it has been kind of the norm in some other places.
I'm still wondering that because we have third world countries that live in very oppressed societies that have had female leaders. So why is it taking the USA this long to be okay having a female leader?
I think it's the same reason it's taking other places as long, because the culture just hasn't supported it. Where even in a third world like Costa Rica, it wasn't about her being male or female. It was about her platform, and it was about her running the nation actually needing reform on education, and that's what she ran. And that's why the people voted for her. And I think for us, we haven't reached that mindset of a person, running a platform that we can kind of relate to, and maybe it's been, I don't know, I don't remember Shirley Chisholm or what she ran on, but I think even when I meet women from around the world that come here through Dallas, from Afghanistan, from third world countries, right. I ask them the same question, and I've said this before, what has surprised you the most when you come to the U.S.? And their answer is always the same, is that we have the same problems here as women that they do in their own countries. And I think that really shows us that we're not that advanced. I mean, in a mindset where women are looked at as equals, or considered equals,
Well, what's interesting is we've had female CEOs, we've had female senators, we've had female, presidents on board of directors, but yet are we ready? I think women might be ready, but are the men ready?
Well, I wonder if some women are ready, to be very honest. I mean, Tilde, you brought up a point that, I'd like to ask you all, what are your thoughts on? But why is it that women are seen as unable to take that office? That there's this, I think one of the things is there's this fear of being sensitive and overly emotional. Right. What do you think about that and some of the other comments that have been made about women holding that kind of office?
Well, I think they're dumb. I mean, to be honest with you. I mean, because I've had, coming from the military and having women leaders there that are just as tough as the men and just as smart and just as, everything as men. So for me, it's just, it's ignorance to be saying things like that, whether you're a man or a woman, and belittling women, or not belittling, but what's
not
the
giving
word?
them the credit that they deserve.
Not giving them the credit. I mean, for somebody that is a strong woman, and is bossy, which I love that word. I own that word. I think that for too long, women have allowed those stereotypes and those terms of being a ball buster or being bossy or any of those things, to allow those terms to belittle them instead of just empowering them, and owning it. I mean, if somebody were to call me a ball buster, I'd say, okay, that's cool. That's your opinion, but how I feel about myself is totally different. And I think it's time for women to just own who we are, and if that happens to be a strong woman who expresses herself, and who knows how to express herself and her opinions, or is a voice for the voiceless, because people aren't speaking up for themselves, and kudos to her.
Right.
And
I mean, it's amazing when we pulled up all these names and stuff like that. Is it okay if I just read this? I mean, so the number of current female elected heads of state right now, there's 20 women. We're talking from Mauritius, Germany, Myanmar, Poland, Nepal, Grenada, the Bahamas, Austria, Liberia, Norway, Marshall Islands, President of Croatia, Malta, Chile, South Korea, Namibia, Bangladesh, United Kingdom, Taiwan. These are all women. Then the current female royal heads of state are women too. And then current female royal heir apparents, we have 5 alone there. And then there's 47 countries that have had female heads of state. That's an enormous number.
But I think it speaks volume to our lack of knowing that in this country, because we can be so centered on us that we don't recognize that there's there are lives outside of the U.S. And so I think that speaks volumes that we typically aren't aware. I've been impressed with, and I told you earlier, with the lady that's a president of Liberia, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, I think is her name. I was so impressed with her, because here you have a leader that's coming into a war-torn situation, and you had a time where there were a lot of women who were being raped. And to walk into that and try to bring your country back together, but she also spoke out against what was happening to women. And to be in a space where you're comfortable in doing that, because I think for a lot of women in leadership, it's always this fear of looking like, and for people of color too, I don't want to look like I'm leaning toward, this group. But you understand what's going on, and there is a sensitivity, and men aren't questioned about that in the same way that women may be questioned. So I think it's amazing to see what she's done. Sure. And yet many of us don't know about the success that she's had in Liberia and bringing education and those kinds of issues to the forefront as a leader and a female.
Well, and also I think she brings, and I think women in general bring, sort of this collaborative and ability to compromise, where men are not likely to compromise as easy as women. You take, for instance, when she, as president, and I was reading this article on Ellen is her name, from Liberia, and how she wanted to pass new term limits for the president, and actually shorten them, not lengthen them, but I think they have 2 6-year terms that they can serve. She wanted to shorten that to 2 4-year terms. Which it makes sense, right? I mean, depending on where you're from, but not wanting so much time to pass before you get somebody new in there. And to me, that shows courage, and also not being selfish. She could easily say, let's make it 10.
Right. Yeah. And another attribute that I would love to add is that level of compassion that women have. Do you think that all men possess the same quality?
I personally think so. I think that it's interesting, the expectations that we have of women. It's interesting to think about the expectations that we also have of men, that we've put, both of our genders in a box. And so if a woman is assertive, then it's, oh my goodness, she's going outside of the coloring, outside the lines, she's out of the box. If a man is compassionate,
it's like, oh no.
Oh, what's wrong with him? And there's some kind of term that is derogatory that I'm going, why would you say that? When we need more of that's in the world. But to your point about owning, I think the other piece, and I get concerned when women go, well, I can own the assertiveness. We got to own the compassion, the nurturing piece too, because we have to be holistic. And I think leaning too much on, one characteristic can be damaging, because leadership can be situational. And there are times when you have to say, this is how it's going to be. And there are other times when it really does need to be collaborative and inspiring. So, I get concerned when women won't own the other side of who they are.
Ownership. You go,
Yeah,
girl.
a plug.
Plug.
So there's talk about Scandal, because
So,
this is an interesting show, and you've raised a point about it.
Do you guys ever watch Scandal?
Some.
Yes. Okay. So do you see a parallel between the First Lady in Scandal and candidate Hillary Clinton?
Yes, absolutely.
They're both shrewd. They're both.
Yeah, that lady in Scandal is.
They're perceptive and they're astute. Both
They've
are.
been cheated on.
Yes. Yes. And you know, is it Millie? Is it Millie?
Yeah.
Okay. She's been scrutinized in the show. So has Hillary. You know, for her husband's acts, behaviors, or whatnot. So you know, I see a real big parallel between both of them.
That's interesting.
You know what I mean?
I don't watch the show a lot because I didn't want something else to be pulled into. And that's one of those shows that I can easily see that I'm like binging on a Saturday trying to catch up with it. But that's an interesting point to think about how, you know, Hillary has been scrutinized for her husband's actions. And even hearing women saying, had she been doing, you know, what she needed to do, that wouldn't have happened. I'm going, wow. And we don't have that same, you know, standard.
And that's what
for men.
everybody's saying. Well, Hillary couldn't control her husband, so how is she going to be able to control this country? You know? So.
Those are two totally different animals.
Yeah, I'm like, that's jumping for people to do that.
And I have to say, because I was at the TED conference or TED Summit a few weeks ago, about a month ago now, and Monica Lewinsky and I was there. And she has given a TED Talk, which I highly recommend every woman watch.
It is very good, yeah.
It is excellent. It is on shame and bullying and those types of things. And to hear it from her perspective was so powerful.
Yeah.
And what I love about her story and her narrative is that she took the narrative back and she stopped allowing people to tell her story for her. You know,
her,
and she owned it.
Yes.
Right? She owned all of it. And I love that because she fell in line with the other women, you know, that we've talked about before that have taken the narrative back, like the girl that was raped, you know, and found by those two boys on bicycles, you know, and how she stood up in the courtroom and faced her rapist and basically read, you know, that letter to him. She took the narrative back because she didn't remember, you know, what had happened, but she could certainly tell them what she was feeling, what she was experiencing, and how nobody, you know, could understand that. And so for Hillary and going back to the Clinton thing, listening to Monica Lewinsky's story and then seeing her firsthand, you know, I mean, you know, it totally changes your perception,
It does.
you know?
Yeah.
And I totally had compassion for her and empathy for her. Like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine. She was 22 years old,
Very young.
you know? I mean, just an amazing, amazing story.
Well, and it's interesting that you talk about the narrative piece, because that's really what this is about, is, you know, other people telling stories about individuals. And you sometimes see, even with Hillary, how people talk about what she looks like. And not to say they don't talk about the other candidate and his hair and things like that, but to see how she's, you know, rated for clothing and
Right.
those kinds of
Or
choices.
how much it costs.
Yeah.
It's so petty. It's really, really petty.
But it's interesting to see how, you know, I remember this quote, and I think I mentioned it on one of the shows, that, you know, who's telling the story? You have to ask the question, who's benefiting from the telling of the story? And I think that, you know, for media, it keeps things going, but how do you get this narrative out about the women that you've mentioned? How do we begin to change our own narratives, you know, as leaders or aspiring leaders? What would your advice be to that?
Whew, that's a loaded one.
Yeah, it is.
That's
Why are we asking?
that's a deep. What time is it? And we're asking these questions.
Dig a little. Come on, dig a little.
You know, I would love to just interview each one of them because I think they each have their own reasons for doing and for running for the position that they ran. I think it's just on an individual basis. You know, I do what I do because of what happened to me, you know, and my own life experiences and wanting to help women. So, and I know you guys do what you're doing because of your own life experiences. And I think that's that's why they're doing what they're doing.
Don't be a footnote, write your own story.
Yeah, and I think
know?
that's cool.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really cool. Is getting women to own it. But sharing the story and the power of this and what it does for other women, because with the Monica Lewinsky piece, the connection, even though you weren't in that situation and I wasn't, it made you more compassionate.
Absolutely.
Because of the power of the story. So these kinds of stories are really important.
And we want to let our future, girls and women know that anything is possible, not just in theory, but in practice.
Right.
So.
And I think that's why, bringing these women to light, and I think it was just released, right? There was an article, I think, on Forbes that listed these women. And to be able to share that via social media or any other way, to get your kids, to get my nieces to read about these women and how they got to do what they're doing. There's a leader, I can't remember her name, but she just got elected to as a president of Mauritius, I believe. And she has an amazing story that I read not too long ago, because she has no political experience, but yet she ran.
Amina Grib?
Yes.
Yeah.
And she ran this platform, and I can't remember, but she won. She ended up winning. No political experience, but it was because of her message and the platform and the reform that she wanted to do in her own country. And to me, that's awesome.
So we have to look at the policy and we have to look at the person. That's we really got to dissect.
Right. And there are some groups that are doing some great work. I want to give a shout out to VoteRunLead, because Erin, who, runs this organization, has been doing work to get women to run for office. And what they help women understand is your story, that the way you can get voters connected to you is by your story. So you don't talk about all this other stuff that you don't know, but if you understand being a mother, there's nothing wrong with that. So how do you tell the story of education and childcare because you're going through that, or you've been in the military? How you can connect to veterans because you understand, because you're there. You know what I mean? So she helps women, and it's this huge network across the country. And so I would encourage people to look them up. And they have webinars all the time, but it's an amazing platform to help women, own their story so that they can use that to create positive change in community. Any final thoughts that you would have or suggestions for women to consider, one, being in leadership and not knocking women who are doing it?
I would just suggest getting more involved in their local communities and checking out to see who the candidates are. And voting. Educate yourself on who you want to vote for, not because so-and-so said so, or because you read one article or watched one TV station that said this or that. Do the research and find out who aligns with your values, who aligns with, what you want your kids' future to look like, and then go vote.
It's about relating to them on a personal level.
Right.
So I agree with Tilde.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you for this wonderful conversation. And I hope, in closing, that we take your advice, that we really look at what people stand for and their stories versus judging what they wear or what sounds good, that we're making intelligent decisions knowing that it impacts children and our generations to come. And so thank you all for sharing this time with us. Any last comments you want to give to the viewers before we go?
Peace.
No, I just really want to encourage women to vote this year, and because it's going to be imperative, no matter who you vote for, it's imperative for you to voice your vote.
And mine is, don't just do it nationally, because you can't support the national leader if they're not people in the local elections who are, have that same ideology to make things happen. So vote in all the elections.
Start local, then move your way up.
Yes, we need your voice.
All
right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.